December 2nd, 1936, New York. Park Avenue apartment, 1:30 p.m. Outside the windows hangs heavy winter fog, concealing Manhattan's skyscraper spires, yet inside reigns unnatural silence. On the wide bed lies a 70-year-old man's body. The doctor certifies death from acute bronchopneumonia and heart failure. This is John Nicholas Ringling, the man whose name is known in every American city, the last of 7 brothers who built history's greatest entertainment empire, the Circus King. The scene resembles a crime scene, yet there are no violent signs here. The killer in this room is invisible. It isn't a bullet or poison. It's total financial collapse. Around the body bustle not detectives but lawyers and creditors. They await the moment to open the financial documents. The atmosphere is saturated with tension, yet not grief. Those present know that John Ringling owned railroads, oil wells in Oklahoma, thousands of acres of Florida land, and an old master's paintings collection worthy of the Louvre. They expect seeing millions of dollars in the accounts securing their claims. However, when the executives gain access to the bank statements, shocking silence hangs in the room. The balance on the planet's most powerful showman's personal account amounts to $311. Not $300,000, not $3 million, $311. This is all that remains of the liquid assets of the man who, in 1925, was among the world's 10 richest people with a fortune estimated at $200 million. At the same time, exactly 1,200 miles to the south in Sarasota City, Florida, stands a locked giant mansion, Kadzan, a Venetian palace on the bay shore built of terracotta and marble. The huge wrought iron gates are chained shut. Inside the 56 rooms, drafts wander, raising dust from the velvet drapes that cost more than the average American home. No one lights the light in the huge ballroom chandelier. No one looks at the Rubens canvases hanging in the darkness. The servants are dismissed. The gardeners are fired. This house, conceived as a monument to eternal love and triumph, at its owner's death moment, turns into North America's most expensive tomb. Creditors are already preparing documents for property seizure. Florida State is preparing to enter a decade-long legal battle for the right to own this real estate. The mansion, which was supposed to become the American dream symbol, becomes collapse's tangible evidence. The contrast between the personality's scale and her life's finale defies comprehension. 10 years ago, John Ringling moved mile-long trains across the country, carried thousands of people and hundreds of animals in his wake, bought competitors with a pen's single stroke. Today, his body is being prepared for modest funerals, and his empire is being torn to pieces by Wall Street vultures. Yet, the most terrible thing in this picture isn't the money lack. The most terrible thing is loneliness. There was no loving wife or children beside the dying magnate. His only daughter died in infancy decades ago. His adored first wife, Mabel, has been dead for 7 years. His second wife, Emily, is suing him for half of a non-existent fortune. John Ringling dies surrounded by papers, lawsuits, and medical reports, trapped in his own ambition's snare. We look at this finale and ask the only question: how did this happen? How did the man who possessed absolute power over millions' imagination and real assets of an entire state come to the finish with $300 in his pocket? The Ringling House's fall story isn't just a businessman's biography. It's catastrophe anatomy embedded in greatness's very foundation. To understand this destruction's nature, we need rewinding the tape. We need going back to where there was no marble, no gold, no millions, to the Midwest's mud, where 7 brothers decided they could conquer the world if they stuck together. This investigation is an attempt to understand the price one has to pay for building a palace on sand. We'll peel back Ca d'Azan's walls layer by layer to see not the gilding, but the cracks in the load-bearing structures. The story doesn't begin with the circus. The story begins with hunger. To understand how a man can die in loneliness with $300 in his pocket, once owning the world, one must go not to Florida, but to the cold and dirty Midwest. The starting point is 1882, Baraboo Town, Wisconsin. There's no marble here, no Venetian windows, and no sea smell. Here it smells of raw leather, horse sweat, and poverty. The future magnate's father, August Ringling, a German immigrant, spent his whole life bending his back over the workbench, making horse harnesses. He was an honest worker who believed in the old European dogma: work diligently, eat modestly, and you'll survive. Yet his sons, and especially John Nicholas Ringling, looked at this workbench not as bread source, but as a prison. They saw how their father aged without accumulating anything but calluses. The same German blood flowed in their veins, yet with one mutation that determined the entire family's fate. They didn't want to survive. They wanted to dominate. John was the 6th of 7 brothers, tall, broad-shouldered, with a heavy gaze that already in his youth made interlocutors feel uncomfortable. Unlike his brothers who gravitated toward artistry, some sang, some danced, some juggled, John possessed a cold calculator's mind. He understood late 19th century American capitalism's fundamental truth long before it became obvious to others. Art is worthless without logistics. On May 19, 1884, the Ringling brothers give their first performance. It was a tiny tent. Tickets cost 5 cents, and the troupe consisted of the brothers themselves and a few local enthusiasts. Yet, behind this modest show's scenes, a machine created by John's and his brother Otto's minds was already working. They divided responsibilities as industrial corporations did. Alfred handled advertising, Charles production, artist selection, and John took care of routes and transportation. It's here that the philosophy forms, which later embodies itself in Ca d'Azan mansion stones. The philosophy of total control and expansion. John Ringling understood that their main enemy wasn't talent lack, but geography. America is vast. To become kings, one must conquer space. In 1890, the brothers make a decision that changes the game rules forever. They abandon wagons and horses and put the circus on rails. This was their first strategic quantum leap. While competitors got stuck in country roads, mud, losing time and money, the Ringling brothers' train, like a battleship, cut through the states, delivering the show to the richest cities strictly on schedule. John personally developed the logistics. He knew every railroad junction from Chicago to New Orleans. He turned a traveling circus's chaos into a militarized structure operating with Swiss watches' precision. By the 20th century's beginning, their fortune began growing exponentially. Yet John Ringling differed from his brothers in one more trait: an insatiable thirst for absorption. He didn't tolerate competition. He didn't want being the best. He wanted being the only one. On July 8, 1907, James Bailey dies. The owner of the legendary Barnum and Bailey Circus, the the Ringling's main and only serious rival. For most, it was newspaper news. For John, it was an attack signal. While Bailey's heirs were in mourning and confusion, John initiated the deal. For $410,000, a sum equivalent to about $13 million today, the Ringlings buy out their enemies. This moment became a historic watershed. Now they controlled both of the planet's largest circuses. They became entertainment monopolists in a country where there was still no radio, no television, no internet. Imagine the power of a man who controls the only visual wonder source for 100 million Americans. This was power comparable to oil barons or steel magnates. Yet John wanted more than just money. He suffered from new money's classic complex. New York and Chicago society looked down on the Ringlings. For the elite whose capitals were passed down through generations, John was simply an upstart, a circus man, a person who got rich showing bearded women and elephants. He wasn't invited to closed clubs. His manners were considered rude. He wore 2 expensive suits, smoked 2 thick cigars, and spoke too loudly. In response to this social rejection, a plan matured in John's head. If society doesn't accept him, he'll create his own kingdom where he'll be the absolute monarch. He'll build not just a house, but a palace that will eclipse the Vanderbilt and Rockefeller estates. He'll make them respect him not through handshakes, but through reverent awe before his wealth. In 1911, John and his brothers buy land in Sarasota, Florida. At that time, it was a wild, swampy area teeming with mosquitoes and snakes. Local residents twirled their fingers at their temples. Why buy these jungles? Yet John saw what others didn't. He possessed a strategist's vision. He saw here a winter headquarters for his circus, a place where his animals and artists could rest and train in the warmth, saving money on heating and renting northern halls. Yet there was a second reason, personal. John was looking for a place for his throne. He was already rich. He was already influential. Yet he lacked one element to complete an emperor's image. He needed a queen and a palace worthy of her. Here we approach John Ringling's personality's key paradox. On one hand, he was a tough, cynical businessman capable of firing 100 people for being a minute late. On the other, he was a man obsessed with the romantic idea of greatness and beauty, which he himself perhaps didn't fully understand. He accumulated millions by transporting illusions across the country. Now, he wanted turning these millions into the grandest, most tangible, and most enduring illusion in his life. By the 1920s, the brothers begin dying one after another. Otto dies in 1911, Al in 1916, Alfred in 1919. John remains the last titan. All power, all assets, all control levers over the giant empire concentrate in his hands. He no longer consults with anyone. He's the voice of God in the show business world. And it's precisely at this moment of absolute power and emerging loneliness that he decides beginning construction of his main monument. Yet, to create a masterpiece, a muse is needed. John's brute force, his ability to lay rails and calculate profits, was the foundation. Yet to build Cadizan, a soul was needed. And this soul appeared in his life long before the first stone was laid in the foundation. Their union became the catalyst that transformed a simple Wisconsin millionaire into an American Venice's creator. Without her, John Ringling would have remained just a rich circus man. With her, he became a legend. Yet this union, like everything in John's life, was a strategic merger of two completely different worlds. December 29th, 1905, Hoboken, New Jersey. On this day, John Ringling concludes his life's most important deal. Yet this time, the contract doesn't specify elephants, nor railroad cars, nor business shares. He marries. His chosen one is Armilda Nell Burton, a 30-year-old woman from the tiny Moonstown, Ohio. At first glance, this seems like an ordinary love marriage. Yet in the Ringling Empire's context, this event becomes a strategic alliance that will define the entire clan's aesthetics and future. Mabel wasn't just a rich man's wife, she was the missing element that John lacked to transform from circus king into American aristocrat. John possessed brute force, a breakthrough character, and the ability to make money out of thin air. Mabel possessed taste, refinement, and most importantly, vision. If John was this machine's engine, then Mabel became its rudder. She instantly understood. To make their money carry weight in high society, it needed conversion into culture. Simply having millions in the accounts wasn't enough. In 1920s New York, this was considered vulgar. One needed possessing history, even if that history had to be bought and shipped across the ocean on a steamer. Over the next 2 decades, the couple turns their annual Europe trips into large-scale expeditions to expropriate the old world's cultural heritage. While John's agents scour circuses in Germany and Russia, searching for acrobats and trainers, John and Mabel visit auction houses and workshops in Italy. This is 2 worlds merger. The fairground world meets the high art world. John approaches paintings collecting the same way he selects circus acts. He looks for size, drama, and scale. He likes Rubens, Titian, Velázquez. The canvases must be huge, the subjects biblical or mythological, the colors vivid. He buys art wholesale, often taking entire collections from ruined European aristocrats. Yet it's Mabel who systematizes this chaos. She learns understanding architectural styles. She studies Christie's catalogs. She forms the visual language on which their empire will soon speak. By the 1920s beginning, their financial power reaches its peak. This is the Roaring Twenties era, and money flows like a river. Yet the circus isn't the only thing feeding the monster. John Ringling diversifies assets. He invests in oil in Oklahoma and Texas. He buys short-line railroads. He becomes a land developer in Florida, where a mad real estate boom is just beginning. By 1924, John Ringling is no longer a man. He's a walking bank. His signature is worth more than a small city's annual budget. It's precisely at this moment of absolute financial omnipotence that Mabel presents John with her great project. They already have land in Sarasota, those very 20 acres on the bay shore bought many years ago. On the site stands an old wooden house they call the cabin. Mabel declares it's time to build a real house. Yet she doesn't want an ordinary American mansion in colonial style. She shows John her sketches and photographs from Venice. She wants transplanting a piece of Italy onto the Florida swamps. She wants building the Doge's palace, mixed with the Daniele Hotel's romance and Nero's Golden House luxury. This was a mad, almost impossible demand, to build a heavy Venetian palace of marble and terracotta on Florida's soft, wet soil in a constant hurricane zone. Engineers said it was a technical nightmare. Yet for John, the word impossible was just a challenge. He was used to transporting elephants across the country. He would build Venice in America, if Mabel wanted it. In 1924, a New York architect, Dwight James Baum, is hired. His task is simple and terrible at the same time: to create a building that looks as if it has stood here for 500 years already. Mabel personally oversees every blueprint. She rejects standard solutions. She demands that the terracotta be fired in a special way, imitating centuries-old patina and sun fading. Construction begins. This isn't just a build, it's a military operation. John hires Owen Burns, Sarasota's largest developer, to realize Baum's vision. Barges loaded with stone, marble, and rare woods begin arriving in Sarasota Bay. Local residents watch this with reverent horror. While the rest of Florida builds light pine bungalows, the Ringlings drive thousands of concrete piles into the ground to hold their ambitions' weight. This house, named Ca de Zan in the Venetian dialect, quote one, was conceived as their triumph's symbol. It was to be a place where the new world finally defeats the old, absorbing its beauty and reproducing it with American scale. Mabel saw in this house her legacy, her artwork. John saw in it a fortress, proof that a saddler's son could live like a Venetian doge. Yet into this palace's foundation, along with the concrete and rebar, the first serious conflict is laid. Construction begins at the moment when Florida's real estate bubble is inflated to the limit. Material prices skyrocket. Labor demands wage increases. John pays without looking. He signs checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars, confident that money's flow will never dry up. He builds eternity's monument, not noticing that the economic ground under his feet begins quivering unsteadily. Ca de Zan was to become a life celebration place. The huge marble terrace facing directly into the water was designed so that their 120-foot yacht Zalathus could dock right to it. Guests were to step from the deck straight onto the balcony, entering a world where time has stopped. Yet while the palace walls grew, rising to 5 stories height, fate was preparing its own script. Mabel, the main inspirer and this project's soul, began weakening. Her health, undermined by years of travel and hidden illnesses, was failing. The palace being built for the queen risked becoming a mausoleum even before the first furniture was brought into it. The world's merger took place. John's money and Mabel's taste created the future masterpiece's framework. Yet behind glazed tiles and Venetian windows' facade, the coming tragedy's shadow was already beginning forming. They were building paradise on earth, forgetting that the gods very much dislike when mortals try comparing themselves to them, and payment for this audacity will be presented not in money, but in life years. Christmas, 1926, Sarasota, Florida. On this evening, Ca de Zan's gates open for the first time to a select circle. This isn't just a housewarming, this is a coronation. Guests arrive not by road, but from the waterside. They're greeted not by a porch, but by a gigantic marble terrace of 12,000 square feet, protruding directly into Sarasota Bay's dark waters. Here at Ocean and Land's junction, Zalathus is moored, John's 120-foot yacht. Visitors step off the deck and find themselves before a facade that bewilders. This isn't Florida. This is Venice teleported across the Atlantic. 36,000 square feet of ambitions frozen in stone, 56 rooms, 18 bathrooms, a tower 61 feet high dominating the landscape. The first thing catching the eye is the color. The house isn't white or gray. It shimmers with pink coral shades, terracotta, and ivory. Yet if you come closer, you'll see something strange. The tiles look worn, weathered, old. This isn't a defect. This is that time's construction history's most expensive illusion. Mabel Ringling personally demanded that each tile be fired at different temperatures, creating centuries-old patina's effect. They paid insane money so that the new house looked as if it had stood here since Columbus's time. This is architectural deception elevated to high arts rank. The psychology is obvious. The Ringlings wanted buying not just real estate, they wanted buying time. Guests enter inside and find themselves in the court, the central hall serving as the mansion's heart. This space is John Ringling's pure psychological portrait. A hall 2.5 stories high, crowned with a huge stained glass skylight. During the day, this skylight filters harsh Florida sun, turning it into soft amber light similar to cathedral illumination or in a circus tent. The floor underfoot is a checkerboard of Belgian marble and American black stone. This geometric pattern makes human figures visually smaller and the space enormous. John created a set where every guest feels like a Lilliputian, and the host descending the wide marble staircase looks like a giant. This is domination architecture. The furniture in this hall isn't just expensive, it has pedigree. Chairs from Louis XV's era, tapestries from the 17th century depicting hunting scenes and mythological subjects. The Ringlings bought up ruined European aristocracy's property, families like Astors and Goulds, and dragged it to their nest. Ca d'Azan's walls are paneled not with local pine, but with walnuts soaked in oils to withstand humidity. The smell inside is a mixture of expensive wood, sea salt wafting from the terrace, and cigar smoke. Yet let's go further into the room that best speaks of the owner's status. Tap room. The bar room. Reminder, it's 1926. Prohibition is in effect in America. Alcohol is banned. Sale, production, and transportation are federal crimes. Yet in the Ringling House's center stands a full bar brought from the famous Sicardi restaurant in St. Louis. Dark walnut panels, stained glass windows, shelves stocked with the best whiskey and wine bottles. This room's presence isn't just drinking love, it's inviolability's declaration. John Ringling says with this bar, "Laws are written for you, not for me." He feels like a state within a state. Here, behind closed doors, protected by his millions, he drinks what he wants when he wants. This is absolute freedom's zone, bought with money. A completely different atmosphere reigns in the ballroom. The ceiling here is a masterpiece by Willie Pogany, the famous scenographer. He painted the panels with dancers of nations' images, 22 figures in different cultures' costumes. Yet, look closely at the dancers' faces. There's something theatrical, exaggerated in them. The whole house is stage. The gold paint on the stucco is real gold leaf, not imitation. Chandeliers with crystal pendants reflect in huge mirrors, creating light's infinite corridor. The mirrors are placed so that wherever you stand, you see your reflection. The architecture's narcissism reaches its apogee here. And now, let's go upstairs to the private quarters, John's bedroom. The area is larger than an average New York apartment's. Furniture in French Empire style, Napoleon Bonaparte style. A canopied bed, massive wardrobes with bronze overlays, heavy velvet curtains. Everything here screams of masculinity and power. John sleeps in an emperor's bed. From his balcony opens a view of the bay and the bridge which he himself financed to connect his possessions to the mainland. Every morning he wakes up and sees the world that belongs to him. Next to it is Mabel's bedroom. The contrast is striking. Louis XV style, Rococo. Light tones, walls hand-painted with flower garlands, bed with a woven rattan headboard. Venetian work. Yet pay attention to the windows. They're covered not only with curtains, but also with thin wire screens on the outside. Mabel feared mosquitoes and diseases. Even in this paradise, amid silk and gilding, there's fear of nature, of the reality waiting beyond the palace walls. Mabel's bathroom is a separate story. The plumbing is made from a single marble piece, faucets covered in gold. Yet the most striking detail is the scales, ordinary floor scales, yet inlaid into the same marble ensemble. Mabel was obsessed with controlling her weight and health. This small detail reveals the anxiety hidden behind the luxury. Construction and furnishings' total cost upon completion amounted to $1.5 million. Adjusted for today's exchange rate, taking into account inflation and purchasing power, this is a sum exceeding $25 million. Yet such an object's real market value today would be several times higher due to the antique furnishings. The house had an advanced for the time electric bell system for summoning servants, a panel with room numbers hung in the kitchen. There were few servants for such a palace, about a dozen, yet their work was invisible. The corridors and service staircases system allowed the staff moving around the house without intersecting with the owners. Cas d'Azan was designed as the perfect living machine. There was even a huge Aeolian organ with 4,000 pipes hidden behind tapestries on the second floor. The sound came out through special grills, filling the entire house with music whose source was invisible, the voice of God sounding from the walls. Yet, strolling through these halls today or mentally transporting oneself to 1927, one cannot shake off a strange feeling. The house is too big for two people. It has too much echo. This is architecture designed for crowds, for receptions, for admiration. Yet when the guests leave, when the lights go out in the ballroom, when the organ falls silent, what remains? Two people remain wandering through the 56 rooms. Cas d'Azan is a golden cage built at Power's Peak. Every detail here, from Venetian glass to marble steps, was meant to scream to the world. _3_ John and Mabel built a set for a happy old age, for a dynasty, for eternity. They didn't know they were building this palace for just 3 winters. This house's architectural psychology is cruel. It demands life, noise, celebration. Without people, it turns into a cold crypt. And very soon, much earlier than anyone could have supposed, the silence within these walls will become deafening. The greatness fixed in stone will prove much stronger than its creator's fragile human bodies. The stage is set, the scenery in place, the lights on, yet tragedy is already backstage, waiting for its entrance. June 8th, 1929. This day divides Cas d'Azan's history into before and after. Mabel Ringling, the woman who designed every tile of this palace, dies. She was only 54 years old. Death's cause is Addison's disease complicated by diabetes. Her last months she spent in her luxurious bedroom, surrounded by Venetian furniture, listening to the bay's sound, yet fading day by day. She lived in her dream's house for only 3 winters. Mabel's death isn't just a family tragedy. It's the moment when the soul leaves the building. The mansion designed as a love and art temple instantly transforms. Without her voice, without her instructions to the servants, without her garden presence, these 36,000 square feet of marble become cold and hostile. John Ringling remains alone in the labyrinth of 56 rooms, and it's here that the real decay begins. We're used to seeing magnates as steel people whom emotions cannot break. Yet John Ringling's story proves the opposite. The biggest mistakes are made not out of stupidity, but out of grief. Losing Mabel, John loses his moral compass and reality sense. He tries drowning out the house's silence with action. It seems to him that if he continues expanding, if he buys even more, the emptiness inside will disappear. Just a few months after his wife's funeral in fall 1929, John makes circus business history's most ambitious and, as it turns out, most fatal deal. He buys the American Circus Corporation, 5 largest competitors' union. The deal price is $1,700,000. To close the deal, he doesn't use his own savings. He takes a loan. He's confident that the economy will grow forever. The deal closes. John Ringling now owns all significant circuses in the United States. He's the absolute monopolist. He stands at the world's top. Yet exactly a few weeks later in October 1929, the stock market crashes. The Great Depression begins. Assets depreciate. Audiences stop buying circus tickets, and the debts remain. And it's here, against a financial storm's backdrop and personal loneliness, that a new character takes the stage, Emily Hogg Buck. On December 19, 1930, just a year and a half after Mabel's death, John marries for the second time. Emily is Mabel's complete opposite. She's a wealthy widow, a social lioness, a woman whose ambitions perhaps exceeded those of John himself. If the marriage to Mabel was 2 dreamers' union building an empire from scratch, then the marriage to Emily resembled 2 corporations' merger that went awry. John sought salvation from loneliness. He sought someone who would fill Cardizan's halls with life again. Emily likely sought status and power that the Ringling name provided. Yet instead of symbiosis, they got war. The house's atmosphere changes radically. The walls which previously heard art discussions and construction plans now hear shouts and dishes smashing. Emily had no intention of being the great husband's shadow or the late Mabel's replacement. She demanded attention, money, and influence. John, accustomed to absolute submission, be it arena lions or office subordinates, faced a force he couldn't control. The conflict reaches its peak quickly. This marriage didn't last even 2 years in normal mode. Emily accuses John of cruelty. John accuses Emily of extravagance and greed. Cardizan turns from a palace into a battlefield. Servants become witnesses to ugly scenes. Legends say that once John locked the bedroom doors to keep his wife out, and she pounded on them so hard that marks remained on the wood. In 1933, divorce proceedings begin, and this becomes the final nail in John's reputation and fortune coffin. Divorce in the 1930s isn't just a legal procedure, it's a public scandal. Emily demands $50,000 in settlement. Huge money. In the Depression midst, she sues, claiming John broke her arm. John files a counterclaim, asserting that she's trying to ruin him. Here before us arises a complex moral question. Who's the villain here? It's easy accusing Emily of being a gold digger, taking advantage of an aging magnate's vulnerability. Yet look at John. This is a man accustomed to buying everything: competitors, art, real estate. Didn't he try buying a new house lady in exactly the same way? Didn't he use Emily as a function, ignoring her as a person? This period reveals the Circus King's character's dark side. we see not a genius strategist, but a cornered beast. He's stubborn. He's aggressive. He refuses compromising. His pride, which helped him build the empire, now prevents him from preserving even its remnants. He spends the last liquid funds on lawyers trying to prove his rightness in the war with his wife. While his business empire crumbles under debt's weight, the house reflects its owner's state. Caldezan begins decaying. There are no funds left to maintain a large servant staff. Rooms are closed one after another. Dust settles on the gilding. Gardens overgrow. Electricity is saved. In the evenings, John sits in the darkness, perhaps with a whiskey glass in that very barroom he built as his freedom symbol. Now it's a bunker. The second marriage, which was supposed to be a new chapter's beginning, becomes the end's catalyst. Emily leaves, yet the lawsuits drain the last juices from John. He wins the divorce in 1936, just a few months before his death. Yet this is a Pyrrhic victory. By this point, he has already lost circus control. The board of directors, consisting of creditors, has removed him from managing his entire life's business. John Ringling's tragedy, in this phase, is a man's tragedy who confused possession with love. He thought he could replace Mabel with another woman as easily as replacing an old poster with a new one. He was wrong. Caldezan rejected the new house lady. The house built on love didn't accept a marriage of convenience. Now, with Emily gone and Mabel dead, John remains one-on-one with his creation. The palace, which should have rung with laughter and music, stands in silence. And this silence is more terrible than any noise. It says that the king is naked. All his millions, all his Rubens paintings, all his marble columns cannot give him the simplest thing, human warmth. We see a paradox. A man who spent his whole life selling people joy and wonder dies in absolute emotional vacuum. His life's external greatness, this giant house, these titles, this art collection, is in monstrous contradiction with his inner reality. He's bankrupt not only financially, he's spiritually bankrupt. And ahead of him awaits the final act. Physical decline far from the house he loved so much and which became his curse. The story approaches its culmination. The crisis is inevitable, and it will strike not only at the wallet, but at the Ringling legacy existence's very meaning. What will remain of the empire when the emperor dies a pauper? The answer to this question will be unexpected even for the most cynical observers. 1932. This is the year when the bottom is pierced definitively. The Great Depression is no longer just an economic term. It's a plague destroying everything living. Yet for John Ringling, the blow comes not from the stock exchange, but from the people he considered pawns. For the first time in Ringling Circus history, the owner's surname ceases meaning control. John made a critical mistake buying competitors in 1929. He took a loan. When the crisis hit, he couldn't pay the interest. New York bankers, men in gray suits who never pitched a tent or fed elephants, seized the moment. They summoned John to the board of directors and pronounced his sentence. He's ousted. The empire he built for 50 years is taken away for debts. He remains honorary president, a title giving no voting rights, yet maintaining appearances for the public. This humiliation was worse than bankruptcy. It was castration. It's precisely at this moment, cornered, deprived of power, and humiliated, that John Ringling undergoes a profound inner transformation. Until this moment, his life was driven by greed and ambition. He wanted possess circuses, possess land, possess women, possess art. His philosophy was simple. The more I have, the more significant I am. Yet now, when everything that brings income is taken from him, he looks at what he has left with completely different eyes. He has Coeur d'Azan left, and he has the art collection left. More than 600 paintings by the greatest European masters. Rubens, Velázquez, El Greco, Titian. Experts valued this collection at millions of dollars. Even in the crisis midst, John faces a cruel dilemma. He has no cash. He barely pays the electricity bills. Creditors demand asset liquidation. Survival logic dictates a simple solution. Start selling the paintings. Sell one Rubens, and you can live comfortably to your day's end. Sell the collection piecemeal, and you'll pay off debts, save the circus, restore status. Any rational businessman would do exactly that. Assets must work. Yet John Ringling makes a choice contradicting all capitalism logic. He refuses selling even the smallest engraving. Instead of saving himself, he decides saving the collection. A tectonic shift occurs in his consciousness. He understands money disappears. Circuses go bankrupt. Companies are absorbed. Yet art is eternal. If he sells the paintings, they'll disappear into private collections, and the Ringling name will be forgotten in a generation. Yet if he keeps them together, if he leaves them to the people, he'll build a monument that outlives the bankers, the Depression, and America itself. He locks himself in his estate. Next to Coeur d'Azan, he has already built the Art Museum building, a pink Renaissance-style palazzo surrounding a David statue copy cast specially for him in Italy. In these last darkest years, when he has no money to repair his own roof, he spends his last strength legally protecting the museum. This is no longer a rich man's story. This is a custodian story. John Ringling, the man who brought a fairground to America, now wants leaving America a Louvre. He signs a will according to which the entire Coeur d'Azan mansion, all the land around it, and the entire artworks collection pass as a gift to Florida State. This decision seems madness to his lawyers. He gives assets worth tens of millions of dollars to the state while he himself dies in debt. His accounts are empty. He lives in a ghost house. Eyewitnesses from those years describe an eerie picture. The aging, sick John suffering from thrombosis, limping through the huge halls. Windows are open to catch the sea breeze because there's no money for fans to run. The humid, salty Florida air penetrates inside, corroding the frame's gilding and the furniture's velvet. The house begins dying along with its owner. The terracotta cracks. In the garden which Mabel turned into paradise with roses and palms, weeds begin growing through. The pool turns green with algae. Yet John doesn't notice the decay. He's obsessed with one goal: to live until the moment when the documents are drawn up so that no one, neither his ex-wife nor creditors nor banks, can dismantle his legacy. Psychologically, this is redemption's moment. All his life he took, now he gives. Perhaps he tried buying forgiveness for his sins. Perhaps he tried preserving Mabel's memory, for this museum and this house were their shared dream. Yet the fact remains, in extreme despair's moment, he chose eternity over comfort. In 1936, his health deteriorates catastrophically. He's 70 years old. His heart is failing. Doctors insist on a New York trip for treatment. Before leaving, he walks around his possessions for the last time. He looks at Coeur d'Azan rising above the bay, at the facade that he and Mabel chose with such love. He knows he won't return here. He boards the train. The very transport mode that made him king now carries him into exile. In New York, he settles not in his own palace, it has long been sold or rented out, but in an apartment. On December 2nd, 1936, the denouement arrives described at our story's beginning. Death, bank account with $311. Yet now we know this figure's context. It isn't defeat's symbol, it's immortality's price. He was poor because he refused trading greatness for small change. Immediately after his death, the chaos he feared begins. Creditors pounce on the property like a piranha's school. They demand selling the paintings. They demand selling the house. They demand dividing the land into plots for development. Florida State, which itself is in deep economic crisis, hesitates. Politicians don't want accepting a gift that requires huge funds for maintenance. They say, quote, for 10 years, exactly 10 years, Cadizan stands abandoned. From 1936 to 1946, the house sinks into lethargic sleep. The gates are chained shut. Security is minimal. Local teenagers sneak onto the property, break windows, steal small items. Moisture and mold take over the interiors. Priceless tapestries rot. The organ, which once sounded like God's voice, is silent and rusting. It seemed that the story would end the same way as many Gilded Age palaces' story, with demolition. The land was worth more than the dilapidated building. Bulldozers were ready, erasing John's and Mabel's dream from the earth's face to build hotels or condominiums in its place. Yet John's will was drafted by the same iron mind that once managed thousands of railcars' logistics. The legal formulations were rigid, all or nothing. It was impossible taking the paintings and refusing the house. It was impossible selling the land. The state was forced either accepting the entire legacy intact and preserving it as a museum or refusing the collection which was already worth fabulous sums at that time. The struggle dragged on for years. Yet in 1946, after World War II's end, Florida State finally accepts the gift. Cadizan's doors open again, not for the elite, not for Gatsby-style parties, but for ordinary people, for those who paid 5 cents for a circus ticket 40 years ago. John Ringling died in solitude, yet his plan worked. He outsmarted time. He outsmarted the bankers. He outsmarted death itself. The crisis that should have destroyed him became his true legacy's forge. If he had remained rich, this house would most likely have been sold to a private individual, remodeled and closed off by high fences. It was precisely his bankruptcy that gifted this palace to us. Now, all that remains for us is drawing a conclusion and understanding what this Venetian mirage on the Florida swamps tells us today. Why do we still look at it with such awe? It's not just about the architecture, it's about the lesson encoded in this building's every stone. Today, Cadizan isn't just a museum, but the American dream's greatest paradox monument. Every year, hundreds of thousands of tourists walk on the same black and white marble tiles where a ruined magnate once paced in solitude. This is the story's final irony. John Ringling died with $311 in his account, yet he left an asset that today cannot be valued in money. If in 1932 he had chosen personal salvation and sold the Rubens collection, he would have died in comfort, yet his name would have vanished just as hundreds of other Roaring Twenties millionaires' names vanished. He chose poverty for eternity. Before us is the great Gatsby's real version. Like Fitzgerald's hero, John built a shining palace for a love that tragically ended. Like Gatsby, he died in isolation, surrounded by luxury that had lost its meaning. Yet, unlike the fictional character, Ringling managed outplaying fate. Standing today on Ca d'Azan's terrace and looking at the sunset over Sarasota Bay, we absorb a cruel yet honest lesson. True wealth is measured not by what you are able to consume, but by what you are able to give. The circus empire has fallen apart. The famous trains no longer run, yet John's house stands. He sacrificed his peace and fortune so that this marble mirage wouldn't disappear. And as long as these walls stand, as long as visitors' footsteps echo sounds in the halls, John Ringling's last and most grandiose show continues.